Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, phase 2 of the digital strategy for IBPOC artists and arts organizations. I'm Perry Vulgaris, digital associate with CPAMO. We acknowledge that we live, work, meet, and travel on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples that have cared for this land now called Canada. CPAMO is located on the land on which the city of Toronto is situated, which we acknowledge is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga, the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. CPAMO is committed to creating meaningful relationships and supporting the diversity of practices, art forms, and cultural expressions. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Joining us today in our next session is Valerie and Anjou from CultureBrew. Over to you, Valerie.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you, Perry, for that land acknowledgement, and thank you to CPAMO for offering us this opportunity to talk to you about developing a digital platform. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Anjou and I have the privilege of connecting with you from the sacred and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations on the west coast of here in Vancouver. We want to acknowledge their resilience of the people, their kindness, their teachings, their generosity of spirit. All of those things inspire us in our work and what we do. It inspires us to our commitment to a process of decolonization, which is part of our attempt to repay a debt that can never be fully repaid. And so all of our work is conscious about the land we're situated on and the people who are the stewards of these lands. As Perry mentioned, my name is Valerie Singh Turner. I am the artistic producer of Visceral Visions and the creative director of CultureBrew.Art. And with me today is Anjou Singh, who is my associate producer of Visceral Visions and the technical director of CultureBrew.Art. So if you want to move on to the next slide, Anjou, I can just mention that, so the structure of our time together, Anjou and I decided that, it'd be great for us to have a less formal conversation about some really heavy stuff. and so we'll probably, we've structured it into these 6 sections followed by a Q&A. So the first section is conceptualizing the project. Number 2 is centering community and equity through a process of decolonization when creating a digital platform. Then into the technical development, and then we'll take a 10-minute break and then move on to UX or user experience and design, then completing the project, and then issues of sustainability. And then if everybody still wants to hang in there, we'll have time for a Q&A afterwards. So each section, we're going to sort of start with some theory, some best practices and philosophies about technical development, followed by a conversation about our experiences of creating CultureBrew.Art. So to start with, Anjou, with everybody shifting practically everything online because of a global pandemic that restricts in-person interaction, what makes a good digital tool or platform that does something of value beyond brochure websites and selling stuff? As artists, what should we be considering before we start spending our scarce time, money, and resources on this kind of work?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session. This to me is a really interesting question. The second half, I think, is actually really relevant and interesting for us as arts administrators and practitioners in Canada, which is the second half of Valerie's question was, what should we be considering before we start spending our scarce time, money, and resources? you know, especially with all of these digital funds coming out and all of these opportunities to build digital tools, I have been really encouraging my colleagues and my peers and the sector to really think about whether we need to build this thing that we're looking to build, and whether there's something comparable out there already that we can connect with, and whether we have the capacity to build it. So what I think we should be considering before we really dive into these projects is really, it starts with capacity and the impact that these projects have on your organization. Unless your organization is to build technology, in which case, yes, that could be a regular project that you have and you already have those resources and skills. But if you don't, then this could be a piece of your work. And it can actually really be quite a large workload that can take away from the other work that you're doing. And we're going to dive more into that. And I think that we're really going to talk about our experience with CultureBrew.Art and specifically how building a digital product had an impact on our larger organization and our other work that we're doing as well. But in terms of the first question, which is what makes a good digital tool or platform that does something of value? So yeah, we all know what a brochure site is. And a brochure site is basically a site that promotes your work or something that you're selling. Most of us have a brochure site. We should, because it's a digital age. So your organization probably has a website that says, this is who we are, this is how you contact us, here's our initiatives. And those kinds of sites obviously have a lot of value. But what I think is really changing is that because of the global pandemic, people are really looking to connect online. And so the pursuit of building platforms seems to be the thing that everyone is interested in right now. And I think it's really exciting because it's moving not just connecting to each other and online meetings like Zoom. It's not just pushing that to the digital realm, but even producing art. There's a lot of discussion around art production, collaborative art production in a digital realm, as well as showing art. And we all know that through live streams and other types of display exhibitions, gallery showings that are all moving to a digital platform. So what makes a good digital tool or platform? Frankly, it's something that you're building, something that people need. That's like the number one, in my opinion. And I think that really when we start to conceptualize the concept, so we're talking about conceptualizing the project here, or even conceptualizing the product. So I'm going to use the word product, which is, I think, I've always been uncomfortable with that term because as an artist and working in the art sector, the word product feels very capitalistic, but it's a really common way to talk about building software and digital tools. But when you're conceptualizing the product, everything should really point back to what the user needs and wants. There's no point in building something people don't need and people don't want. And so it should really, in order to build something that has value, you really need to do this consultation, this surveying, and checking to see if that's what people are looking for. And so I think, yeah, I hope that answers your questions, Valerie, but I think that would be my big thing is build what people want and make sure you have the capacity to build it. And let's make sure we're realistic about what we can do.
So I guess in terms of our project, CultureBrew.Art, this project was conceived in 2015. So it's 2021, like 6 years ago now. Like a lot of racialized artists, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I work primarily in theater, but I'm writing a libretto for an opera now. So, and I have a dance background. So my first large piece was interdisciplinary. And here in Vancouver, but I lived in Toronto for a while too. I mean, this happens to everybody who's racialized or Indigenous, people you become like an unpaid de facto casting director. Like people come to you and say, hey, I'm looking for, a Black actor for this, or do you know any Asian actors for this, or, stage manager, or all those kinds of things. And, when you're starting out and doing this work and becoming a member of the community, you go, oh yeah, I have a friend, or I know somebody. You want to help them out. You want to get people work because we're not getting the same number of opportunities, and we want to help our community get work. But after a while, it becomes more difficult because not only is this unpaid work taking away from your own time and your own work, there also started to be this expectation that that we should be doing this work and for free. And it feeds into the white supremacist system of people of color being expected to serve the needs of white people. And this sort of really, kind of came to a head in 2015 here in Vancouver. We have, for the people who live in Toronto, you have the Dora Awards for your theater. We have the Jesse Richardson Theater Awards, which is a similar thing in Vancouver, where we recognize outstanding achievements in the professional theater community. And in 2015, along with 3 other racialized artists, we were a core group of artists that wrote an open letter to the Jesse's board, calling them out for systemic racism. Because we were starting to see, despite the fact that artists of color were creating their own work and producing it and getting seen, that it was not getting the same kind of recognition as those done by our white colleagues. And the letter got 200 local artists to sign it. There was a town hall that the Jesse's board hosted that, more than 200 people showed up for. There was a very big conversation. I feel like 2015 was the year when there was a really enlarged awareness of systemic racism, an acknowledgement of that. I mean, I think, people of color, we knew this all along, but there was a real acknowledgement from the wider community that this was something we need to start thinking about and addressing. And I guess here in 2021, after, the murder of George Floyd last year and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, the idea that systemic racism and white supremacy, it's part of the regular conversation now, but back in 2015, it wasn't. So I first thought of the idea, like, we just need a database, like, to relieve this burden on all the artists of color in the community. We should just have a database. And so I started looking into some funding for that. There wasn't in 2015, there was no digital strategy fund at that time by the Canada Council, but I did manage to get a small grant from the city of Vancouver to start to do some research. I mean, because everybody said we need a database, but, what does that database look like? And how it would be sustainable? Like, I was not going to, I knew for myself that I didn't want to create something that I would be spending the rest of my life, keeping up for the benefit of other people at the expense of my own work as an artist. And so I knew that it had to be some kind of paid system because, I just couldn't afford for my own life to do this for free for the rest of my life because, I knew that racism and systemic racism would not be solved by the time I was dead. So this is going to be a long-term project. So that's another thing that you need to conceptualize is like, that's part of the sustainability question we'll be talking about later. So having already those ideas, I worked with some people to create a number of in-person facilitated focus groups. It was a mix of artists of color and with what we call engagers, or the artistic directors and producers that would be hiring artists. And the results of that initial not only did we do in-person focus groups, we also did an online survey that we invited lots of people to respond to, and we also did phone interviews with, the Lower Mainland. Vancouver is pretty densely populated with artists, but we have artists doing work, on Vancouver Island, further in the interior and up north. And so that was one of our ways to try to do outreach beyond our normal circle in the Greater Vancouver area. And once we gathered that information and analyzed it, we discovered that, everybody agreed we need something like the database. And of course, there were, it was surprising because, we were afraid that, people are so used to getting stuff for free that they didn't want to pay for it. But we did have a number of larger arts organizations and mid-sized ones going, yeah, you know what? We would pay for something like this. We don't know how much we would pay, but we recognize that there's a value in it. And because, our outreach efforts are not very successful, the time and the resources we're putting into finding Indigenous and racialized artists is not adequate. And of course, we did still have some people said, no, it should be free, So there's always going to be those people. So I guess so. I don't know where I want to go from here. Andrew, can you kind of?
Yeah, I'm here because I actually have something I want to point out that I think is super important that was brought up to me by someone in a phone call yesterday, but I keep hearing this over and over. And also when I sit on juries for some of these grants, I see a similar problem. And that's the problem of what you kind of described earlier, where it's you create these products and we ideally want to see the investment of our work and the money from our funders and actually the pay cut we all take when we do this kind of work sustain for a very long time. And what's been happening is that these digital platforms, we actually mentioned like 3 or 4 in my call yesterday, pop up. There's a lot of effort going into them. They pop up and then they disappear. And so there was actually one digital platform that, forget which one it was, but it came up. I was really excited about it. It was like, anyways, I won't worry about which one it was. And it came up and I remember becoming really engaged with it. And then it kind of disappeared. And I was very sad to hear yesterday that it's just done. Like the site's gone. The presence of it is gone. We actually looked up a couple more and they're just abandoned. And so I really want to make sure that when this piece around research, consulting, and surveying our target audiences or the users that we think we have is super important. We need to make sure that there is a need for this. And we want to make sure that as we put in all of that effort, that we want to build these things for a long time. Databases in particular are extra complicated. I'm sure all of you can relate to that, which is that the effort of building a database, populating the database is a ton of work. And so what happens to the data if the project folds? So I'm curious, what happened to the data on these other projects? And I'm wondering if maybe that's something that happens early on when you conceptualize the project is, is there another project out there that's doing what I'm doing? Am I in contact with those people? So if you're building another database that is meant to do something similar, like let's say one that's like women in experimental music and then BIPOC folks in experimental music, yes, there's a slight difference there, but there's also some similarities. And I'm wondering, are those conversations happening between them? Those are fake things I made up, by the way, I'm not referring to anyone, but are there conversations happening between them to say, do we need to replicate this work? Can we combine our efforts and or being in contact just in case the project does not successfully continue, that they can hand over that data so that these people who put in the effort, their efforts are, not for naught. And yeah, that's the big thing I would say there. And the consultation and the surveying, I just think one thing about the project, the CultureBrew.Art project, which by the way, historically was called Diverse Theatre BC. when I first applied to Valerie's job posting, and I applied for the job and I started work, you know, the next week, Valerie handed me a bunch of files to go through. There was a lot, and there was a lot of consultation and surveying. And this gave me the impression that this was a very good project to work on because there was so much consultation and survey, and there was a definite need. And of course, since I came onto the project in June 2018, we're seeing other database project ideas come up. But we're really trying to reach out and make sure that we're all talking as much as we can so that we can potentially save some of the effort that everyone's putting in, which I'm going to push us into starting business planning early, Valerie. So
actually, I just wanted to build on what you were just saying about other products out there, because that also had an impact on the concept of what was originally called Diverse Theatre BC. Thanks, Andrew, for bringing that up. But you mentioned that there was other products out there. So as part of our research as well, we did look at what else was already out there before, you know, we started investing a lot of time and energy and money into what was originally called Diverse Theatre BC. So I'm an actor as well. I'm a member of UBCP ACTRA, or it was ACTRA that I joined when I lived in Toronto, and then I joined UBCP out here in Vancouver. I'm also a member of Equity. But the interesting thing about the film and television business is if anybody else is working as an actor or performer in that industry, is that, you know, there's already a number of databases out there for actors. And the main one right now, the industry standard, is Casting Workbook. And, you know, it's huge. It's, you know, got actors in it and models, I think, stunt people and voice actors, you know, all through the United States and in Canada, throughout North America. And they have, their model is that the actors pay. You know, they pay $100 every year. And then the casting directors and the producers and agents, they get in for free. And so they have built their model on the backs of the people who have the least privilege, who have the least power. ACTRA also has a database of actors, but they some kind of talent database. They have one that's they used to have, you know, before there was the internet and stuff, they had something offline called Into the Mainstream, and they would publish a book of Indigenous and racialized actors that were their members. And this book would be published every year with their headshots and a little bio and stuff. And they sort of moved that once they got online. It's something like ACTRA Diversity or Diverse ACTRA or something. And I remember being invited to, you know, put my information in this database, you know, as a member. I got into it for free. And I remember being like really frustrated with the way they were trying to put me into a box because of my racialization, you know, labeling me the way that, you know, the white community or white power structures see me or other me. And that informed the way I started to shift the idea that, you know, yeah, database will serve the needs of, you know, the people with power, the ones who are hiring us, or the ones who have the money to, you know, to fund projects. But what I was more interested in how we might connect with each other as artists, because we are so isolated. We only get to know each other when we're hired and working on a project, or once, you know, if you move to a new city, like I moved to Vancouver, you know, remembering how it was like, you know, to try to get to know this community and to find other people who shared my concerns or political outlook or the problems that I have as a racialized artist in getting work. And when stuff comes up, like, you know, the latest Robert Lepage play with cultural appropriation or stuff, like, you know, and how the community can find each other and take action together. That was another area that I wanted to really find a way for technology to serve these very specific needs that we have as Indigenous and racialized artists. So, and as Andrew mentioned, there had been a lot of well-meaning and well-intentioned sites out there. There was one that that was also an inspiration to me. It was called First Nations Talent Bank. And what I really, and it doesn't exist any longer either, but what I really liked about it was its cross-disciplinary approach to inclusiveness. You know, it wasn't just actors, but it was including musicians and composers and writers and filmmakers and directors. And so Diverse Theatre BC, you know, the original idea was it would be multidisciplinary, because it was clear to me that actors will not change the world. They don't have the power to do that. They're not the storytellers, they're not the creators. And so right from the start, it had to be more than actors for our database. It had to include people who were the storytellers, who have the power to make decisions.
Yeah, and that's also why I was interested in this project as well, because I'm not an actor. I'm a musician and a media artist. So I felt seen already with the concept of the project. I also wanted to just quickly mention to everyone, and this is a bit of a report back, but I've been working with a couple program officers at Canada Council for the Arts to really encourage this shared information on projects, because as I mentioned, when we sit on juries, the applications, you start to see that projects are being repeated and efforts are being repeated. And the Canada Council for the Arts has told me, and you know, they're a big entity, so it takes them a long time to do things, but they have told me that they are going to start encouraging this knowledge sharing about what people are doing for projects. So that was a frustration that I think Valerie and I both felt. And when we started this project early on, and Valerie was actually telling me she was promised that there would be this like community connection for us to talk about our projects. And we feel that that's really missing. It's fantastic CPAMO is doing this and giving us the opportunity to share this with all of you. But I think this needs to happen on a bigger scale. So, you know, if this organization is doing music live stream, building music live stream, and this organization is doing it too, we don't really need two platforms for music live streaming. Maybe we do, because there might be different perspectives, but let's make sure we don't need to. So replicating work is, I think, now on the Canada Council's radar. Great. So okay. Valerie, what do you think? Should we talk about business planning? It's not the funnest, but it's an important piece of the work.
Yes.
Would you like to start, or would you like me to start?
Sure, I can jump in. So once we got, we did all the research and the community consultations, and then the Digital Strategy Fund got announced in the Canada Council, which was really the lifesaver of this project, because just to take a slight detour, I tried to get funding through other regular Arts Council programs, whether it was Canada Council, the BC Arts Council, and the City of Vancouver's Cultural Services Department. The City of Vancouver doesn't have an Arts Council, they have a Cultural Services office, and it was really difficult to get funding. And even for the programs where, you know, there was extra funding for projects that you know, had goals of equity, especially for racialized and Indigenous artists, there was a lot of pushback, because even if I was just asking for $20,000, which is not a lot of money when you're trying to build technology, some of the feedback we got was, you know, oh, you could do it for free on WordPress. Why do you need so much money? So yeah, we, you know, I also had this idea that we need to go big or just go home, because yeah, I was just not going to create another small project that, you know, would take over my life. I mean, even with a big project, with, you know, we've been fortunate to really get some significant funding for CultureBrew.Art, but even with that, you know, has had a, you know, we got the funding in 2018 and it's almost 2020, it's 2021. So almost 3 years later, and it's still taken a majority of my time at the expense of my artistic work. So I just want to keep emphasizing that this is not just something you do at the side of your desk. This is something that's going to take a lot of your time and energy. So the business planning is part of that work as well. So hiring a good project manager is a really big part of it. And so I'm super grateful that Anju decided that this was a project she was going to apply to, because this project would not have survived without Anju. I just want to make that clear. Like, having a project manager who knows what they're doing and is really committed to, seeing the project through is super important. So that's really one of the biggest considerations. First of all, is getting an excellent project manager. The next thing is, we put in money in our budget to hire a business consultant. I mean, even though artists, if you run your own company, which I do, I founded Visceral Visions. We're in our 18th year now. We are business people, when we're producing things, we are setting budgets, we are paying people, we are getting projects up on time. Like, we are actually running businesses. But, a technology business is just a different field, and there are different considerations that I'm not aware of. And, and planning, it's basically a startup enterprise. And so this planning of, especially if you're going to have that sustainability question again about revenue coming in, how to plan for it, setting rates for subscriptions or membership, like all those conversations, like what it looks like, who your market is, how big that market's going to be, hiring a good business consultant to help you ask those questions that you may not even know you should be asking, and then having a real hard discussion about, is the vision of this project, is the concept of this project big enough to eventually sustain itself? Because we can't rely on grants forever, and you don't want to be working for free. Like, that was the other thing as part of the values of my company, and the values of equity, is that we always pay people. We don't expect people to work for free, and we pay them, at least a living wage, because Vancouver is a very expensive city, and I believe that we need to pay people for the value that they bring. So that's another consideration. It's like, if you can try doing it, paying people minimum wage, but you don't get the expertise you need. You need to think about paying people the higher rates in order to get the expertise you need if you're going to invest in this kind of project. Do you want to add anything to that, Anju?
Yeah, I think the big thing that I want to add is that I think when we talk about business planning, we're not just talking about, this isn't a business model like other business models. There's like a whole different world in software as a service, which is what we're essentially providing. If you are going to charge a fee for using your digital tool, there are models out there that are very established, and there's also a culture. You don't want to get users, training users to do things in a new way is very difficult. Once everyone started using Facebook and messaging looked a certain way and paying for things happened a certain way, you have to keep that in mind, because it's really difficult to retrain. And you can do that in subtle ways, but you really want to see what's been happening out there. And a business consultant or advisor who knows software, who knows platforms and who knows digital platforms is important. The other thing I wanted to add was, like, yeah, there's a very different thing between building a website for, like Valerie said, the funder said, well, why don't you just build this in WordPress for free? In my conversation with an arts organization yesterday, we really went in deep in this part of the conversation, which is, what's the difference between building something that people just show up at the site and they just look at it, so something more static, brochure-like, which could even still be a database. Like, we could have done our database where you just show up and you just look at it from this end. And it's very different to build a platform that you engage in. The costs are different. The risks are different. I want to talk about these things a little bit later when we get into privacy and whatnot. And I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. So it looks like for branding, I think, Valerie, we should perhaps move branding into the later section. I think there's an appropriate place for it. Regarding a tech advocate and an advisor, I can start this one, and then perhaps we can speak quickly about this. So having a tech advocate and advisor is a very important thing for the arts sector. For Valerie and I, we had some really specific experiences trying to build digital technology, working with developers and technologists. So we are racialized women. And I feel that our experiences were very, very unique in terms of if we had shown up at the table as white men, I think we would have had a very different experience. Furthermore, not only are we racialized women, we're from the arts sector, and everyone here can relate to what the regular world sometimes thinks of our sector. They think we're maybe a little bit Mickey Mouse, or that we don't have this level of professionalism or understanding in place. Meanwhile, we're artists. We are the most adaptable, creative, thoughtful people that can build software. I actually think the potential for us to build platforms and software and technology, I think we do an excellent job at it. So when we showed up at the table, we experienced a lot of things that really, I felt, added extra labor to the project that we could not have predicted, that we're going to warn you about. Even if you are not racialized women, but you're from this sector, which is when you show up at that table, you are not going to, we experienced gaslighting. We experienced being talked down to. We experienced not being heard, which was actually extremely expensive. It was so expensive to not be heard. So the effect of not being heard, we all know about, is painful and hurtful. But the fact that it cost money was new to me. It was actually, I think it cost us like $100,000 for the simple fact that the developer and the technologists were not listening to us. And that became really a huge impact on the project. And so what we're realizing is that you really need somebody to show up in the room that's going to champion you, that believes in you. And you also need to believe in yourself when you show up in that room, because we have this unique position because we know how to work with creativity. We know how to work with resilience. And especially as BIPOC women, I mean, who is more resilient than the most marginalized people? To work with minimal resources, we know how to do that. To be creative and solve problems when things go wrong as artists and racialized women, we know how to do that. So we have all these incredible capabilities and skills that were perhaps not emphasized enough early in our experience, because I'm not going to speak for Valerie, but for me, frankly, I was just surprised at how we were treated. And so if I could give one takeaway for everyone to walk away with, which is trust yourself when you show up at that table to build this digital tool. Do not fall into the trap of like, I'm not a tech person, so I don't know. That's not true. We are artists. We are arts practitioners or administrators, and we have the experience. And this idea that the expert is the tech, this is an old idea. If you follow new philosophies in software development specifically, I'm not even talking about arts or equity or anything, in software development in general, the idea of the tech person being the expert is an old concept. The new idea is that the user is the expert, the end user. And when we listen to the end user, we see success of products. And there's been the failure rate of products that do not respond or listen to the user is very, very high. And so we really need to go in there and realize, as the user and as the representative of the user, we are the expert. So walking into that room with that mentality, I think can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars, to be frank. Valerie, I'll let you go from there, because I'm sure you have lots to say.
Yeah, I do want to add to that, Andrew brings up some really great points, that we are the experts in what we need to see and who the end users are going to be. It is really, it feels like it's often a backward kind of thing. Like, we often felt we were being treated as the vendor rather than the client, and that the technology people were setting themselves, I mean, they are the experts in the technology, like the coding and the stuff, but we have to remember that the technology is there to serve a need. You know, technology is not being built for itself because it's useless. So, but it's really hard, you know, with there's entrenched sort of attitudes, you know, the tech industry is very male and very white. And so that sort of navigating those kinds of power dynamics adds to not just the emotional labor for us as racialized women, but in actual time, which translates into money when you're paying them, you know, anywhere from $125 to $150 an hour. And when they don't listen to you and they come back and they bring something that was not what you asked for, you are still paying them to like adjust it, or you are paying them to be in that meeting with you to tell them why this isn't serving your community and your vision of what this project is going to be. And so finding the right technical advocate, advisor, but we talk about it in terms of advocate because you really do need somebody in your corner who is fighting for you. Because as Andrew mentioned, when you're an artist, you're seen right away as somebody who is kind of flaky or may not know what they want or will change their mind. It's just any number of things that just makes the process a lot more difficult. And where you find these unicorns, I don't really know, except for Andrew. But I think there's going to be more and more people because, as I said earlier, you know, so many people are trying to move projects online that they're going to have to respond to the needs of actual people rather than, I mean, one of the other things we had to push, we didn't realize at first, but is something, again, that's part of the tech industry, is that a lot of them are interested in, you know, creating cool stuff or cool code that's really, you know, innovative, but it doesn't actually serve the project. And sometimes the basic code, you know, is something that, you know, you should be going for because, well, Andrew can probably speak to this more, but, you know, the basic stuff can be more stable. As soon as it gets into more custom stuff, especially when, you know, you want to ensure there's security upgrades in a system. I've worked for, you know, when I wasn't an artist working on this full time and doing temping work, I worked for a number of companies that were, you know, building their own portals for various things, and it would be custom made. And then as soon as they had to do an upgrade for security for the latest hacks, the system would go down because they had to spend a lot of time fixing all the little glitches that happen when you have a lot of custom code. So maybe, Andrew, you could talk about that just a little bit more in terms of tech advisors.
Sure, yeah. I'm actually going to hold off on the technical stuff, and what Valerie's alluding to here is potentially using a CMS versus a custom build. So for example, using WordPress or Drupal or other systems that would, you know, they have these things built in, but that's really a development thing. The thing that I would end off with regarding tech advocates and advisors is actually comes from project management methodology, which is roles. And this is something that I think has been really helpful. So as Valerie mentioned, I work on this project, but I also do a similar role as a consultant or an advisor for a few other projects in the arts and nonprofits. And I found that it's been helpful recently to tell people about these roles. So the two roles that I think you can Google to understand how you can really organize your project is the role of a product owner. So a product owner is somebody who owns the product. You need someone, whether that be a consultant or an advocate or an advisor, or it could be you if you have that time. Sometimes it can even come on the development side in some frameworks. The product owner owns the product. And again, the product is what you're building. They are the ones who have an interest in the fact that the technology is built and it's meeting the user needs. So this target of like, what are we building? Why are we building? Who are we building it for? The product owner is making sure these things are in line. So we're not just building this feature that nobody wants for no reason. And the product owner's job is to make sure we're not wasting money, time, and energy building something no one wants. The second role I want you to all be mindful of is something called a project sponsor. So the project sponsor is someone who is usually in Valerie's role. This is the person who's like brought the idea, they have the vision, they believe in the project, and they want this thing built. And they can get very involved. Valerie has moved in and out of levels of involvement in the tech meetings. And there are times if the project starts to go off that she might be more present, and then there's times when she might step away. The project sponsor is just saying, yes, I believe in this project, and they're usually communicating with the product owner to say, this is what we're trying to build. So when you think of tech advocates and advisors, just I found that those two terms are really helpful for arts organizations to understand what level of responsibility you might be looking for. And if you have found the funding, conceptualize the project, come up with the vision, you are probably the project sponsor. If you are making yourself the product owner as well as the project sponsor, I just want to warn that's a lot of responsibility. I really want to warn, and I feel like I've been warning throughout, and I'm not trying to scare everyone, but this cognitive load and responsibility that I'm really going towards, I think I would really like everyone to consider that, because it's a lot of weight that you're carrying on your head when you carry this project. So by splitting up those roles into two people, I find that that cognitive load is shared. You have someone who cares about the daily product owner about what's being built, and you have somebody who's got the vision and the responsibility of the project overall. I hope that was a helpful thing. If that wasn't helpful, I'm sorry to take you into boring terminology, but I hope it was helpful. Yeah, maybe we should move on to the next topic, unless we have questions. Well, we have one comment from Frederick, which I actually really love this comment. Valerie, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, but Frederick asked, what happens with the data when the site closes? That is a very important question. Do the user's terms and conditions address the potential donation of non-sensitive data in the advent of the closure of CultureBrew? Unless you seek consent in advance of the closure, the data is lost. This is a very good point. I'm so glad you brought this up, Frederick. And privacy and security and data security and responsibility is super important. So yes, you're right. And that's, I guess, why I was also saying these conversations about what's going to happen, what could happen, needs to happen early on. But you're right, as soon as they've signed the terms of service and we have not included that the data could be shared, you're right, it's inappropriate for the data to be shared, but perhaps there is a different way to do this. I guess my concern is mainly that we put in all this work, collecting all this, supporting these artists, then the platform shuts down and it just disappears. So maybe that's, the solution of talking about that is not going to be resolved by sharing the data. It's actually illegal. So you're right. Thanks for saying that, Frederick. That's a really important point. Great. So if we don't have any more questions, we're going to move on to the next section, which is centering community and equity through a process of decolonization.
So, yeah, maybe we'll start this section with a question for you, Anju. So in addition to silencing or erasing the presence and voices of Indigenous and racialized people, the damaging impacts of white supremacy and capitalism also include the mindset and the myth of scarcity, which leads to all sorts of, frankly, mindfuckery and self-gaslighting of people of color, especially racialized women. So what are some of the ways that technology can perpetuate inequality and systemic racism, systemic oppression, even if the development is led by racialized women?
Yeah, it's that's not a small question. And so yeah, I would say that basically, when we're talking about I mean, I kind of want to start with this book, The Algorithms of, what is it called again? The Algorithms of Race?
Oppression.
The Algorithms of Oppression. So yeah, the answer to this is the book. But no, if we don't want to just read the whole book right now, I think that the one thing that, you know, I really feel is, it happens to me, I experience this the most on the building of the technology side, which then affects the user. So when we are not represented in this room, so that happens in multiple ways. So when we do not consult with our communities, so when we do any digital work without consulting with the people that we are serving, supporting, building for, we're not hearing their voice and we're not serving them. And then when we go into the room, the experience I described in the section before that Valerie also experienced, when we walk in that room and we're not heard, and we have to push for being heard, then we get exhausted from being heard and accept this like in between because we're just exhausted from not being heard by especially white male developers. I think that, again, we're not serving people. So technology perpetuates inequality and systemic oppression by the simple fact that we're not the ones in the room building it and we're not being heard. And so there's this really big piece around centering community and equity that has a responsibility for us. I feel like for everybody in our sector, it's not a strange or a novel concept to go out and do this consultation, because we know how to do this. It's built in our sector, and we are taught to go out, consult, get feedback, apply that feedback, work with that. And artists also have that process, right? You get especially writers and yes, I feel especially writers and people in theater where they show and they workshop concepts and then they get the feedback and they apply it and they improve things. This is built into artistic process. But where it starts to get really funny is when we can't apply that sort of process in the tech world. In the tech world, this is on an ideological level, it exists. And you're going to hear, when you engage developers, you're going to hear them talk about agile process. They're going to go, oh, we work in agile. But do you really? Because when that iterative concept comes up, I found my experience was developers get a little bit weirded out and they get nervous because ambiguity is really scary for a lot of people. Not for artists, not for arts administrators, because, you know, ambiguity is normal. When is your next grant? Can you pay this contractor? This is our life. And so when we do this kind of consultation, for us, we bring in this information, we're open to hearing it, we want to see it applied. But it is when we bring in that, when we do that consultation, we have a responsibility to then walk into the room and advocate for those perspectives and make sure that those things happen in development, which Valerie, you know, from our experience, we would get feedback, we'd come back and it wasn't heard, or we were told the user is wrong. And again, this goes back to the user is the expert. The user knows what they want. If you're making this for a user, make it for the user. The user is the expert. But we kept getting told the tech is the expert. The technology, not even the tech person, but the technology is like this expert entity, which it's not. And so I think that, yeah, for me, this is perpetuated by technology, inequality and systemic oppression, because technology wants to work in a capitalistic way. That's like one big thing. Technology and capitalism are very closely knit. To separate them takes a lot of effort. And there's a lot of projects that are really making this effort, but it's still prevalent and it's dominant. Just even the cost of building technology is an example of that. And then the not hearing and being afraid of changes. So I would really, yeah, even if, like you said, even if the development is led by racialized women, I feel we try to keep a really strong lens of hiring Indigenous and racialized people on our team. We have an Indigenous community builder. We have Valerie and I, and, you know, we try to keep these perspectives in mind. But I feel like at the end of the day, we're still answering to white men and capitalist culture. And that's very, very frustrating. And that's like a deeper change that needs to happen in terms of who we have access to in technology.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that, you know, we try to keep the project on track to the values that we're trying to espouse in this project. I mean, talking about centering community, we, in our budget for, you know, our digital strategy grant, we also put in a large chunk for more community consultations. Like we did some when we did the research to find out if people wanted it, whether they would pay for it, what they would like to see in this project. And then once we got some large funding, we then went out to the community again. We organized 5 more community consultations. We made sure we at the outset, we decided that we would approach this project with a intersectional racial equity lens. So that meant that all the facilitators had to be Indigenous or racialized. We had 2 sessions that were only for Indigenous artists to make sure that we were really responsive to their specific needs. We had 1 session that was for Indigenous and racialized artists who identify as LGBTQ. We had planned another session for people who have a disability. I have to own that, you know, we didn't have the resources to do the right outreach to get, you know, to find those people to sit on in a consultation. And so that made us realize that, oh, we need to we have to find more money and resources in order to effectively find to consult with those communities, which is an ongoing kind of issue for us, is to get funding to do that properly and to hire the consultant that can help us do that effectively. We wanted to make sure we tried to reach out to the deaf community as well. We made sure that there would be American Sign Language interpreters available for artists who are deaf if they wanted to participate. So there was a lot of extra considerations and planning that we had to do in order to ensure that we were actually talking to the end users, the people that we wanted to be part of this community. And out of those consultations came a lot of these other things we see listed on the slide. So the idea of privacy and security and safety and accessibility, they were all concerns brought up by the community. You know, some of them we had anticipated, but to hear directly from LGBTQ racialized artists, you know, their very specific concerns. But the other thing that was really amazing was that, you know, when we brought this group of people together, they were so excited to find so many other people that they didn't know. And, you know, we take moments like that to go, oh, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect people who would have no other opportunity to connect with each other and to find those common points of not just connection, but community, of support, of excitement and inspiration. So that's another great reason to have community consultations, is because they can inspire the work as well and open up our ideas of what this project could be. So we started as Diverse Theatre BC, but we moved into this wider idea of Culture Brew because we realized that why are we restricting it to theater? You know, we started with theater because it was multidisciplinary already, but then we go, well, why don't we just make it open to dancers and musicians and writers and composers, because we're doing that anyway. Let's just sort of open up the vision. So community consultation can also help deepen the concept of what you're trying to do. One other thing I want to do before I hand it over to maybe Andrew's comments is the questions about privacy. Andrew will talk more about security, but you know, I also realized that we needed to make resources available to hire a certified privacy consultant to make sure that the work we were doing wasn't contravening any legislation that is happening both at the provincial and at the federal level. We also consulted with a lawyer. So there's a whole bunch of legal things that are happening about, you know, we had questions about copyright. We had questions with the privacy consultant. We had questions about What information are we collecting? Do we need to collect that information? There's a lot of information that technology companies collect from us as a matter of course that we have no choice over. We have to give them that information, like your birth date or, you know, where you live and your phone number. Like there's a lot of information that we just hand over to technology companies because they make that a requisite to accessing their services. But they're only getting that information so that they can sell your data to make more money and then sell stuff to you back once they've sort of, you know, mined through the data. Again, this is about, again, thinking about how we stop perpetuating systems of oppression and capitalization and exploitation by going back to what does our community need? How do we respect our community and ourselves? What is it that we actually need? So when we talk about sustainability, we're not talking about the model of like selling everybody's data. And, you know, that's not, again, if we're grounded in community and working towards ideals of justice and equity, we had to keep looking for another way of doing things. So that's another part of the work, is that we were constantly, as Andrew mentioned before, working in an agile and iterative way. Like this is the way people normally, how technology normally works. And we go, we don't feel good about that. So now we have to take the time to sort of figure out what that is and what our options are for doing things differently, which takes time and money to do. Over to you, Andrew.
Great. Yeah, actually, it's funny because I'm looking at my notes for privacy and all I have in capital letters is start now with a bunch of exclamation marks. Yes. So if the one thing I can tell everyone is start now. I advise on another project. It's a nonprofit, not an arts project, but they just launched their product. They put so much work into it. They put so much effort in. But even though I've been telling them to get their privacy stuff done, you know, 9 months ago, almost a year ago, I was like, start this work. They started at the last minute. And it completely delayed the launch of their project because the implications of privacy on the technical build are surprising. Terms of service, as Frederick brought up, is super important, and that needs to come early. And then the lawyer, so first of all, horror story, it cost them $15,000 to get this privacy work done because it was in such a rush. So that's the first thing. It's going to cost more if you wait. Second of all, the lawyer came back and there was a bunch of technical things that the lawyer said, well, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? These are easy things that could have been built in to this system that were not included because the privacy conversation started way too late. And furthermore, there was just, just so many things, you know, even just going into data security. I'm going to go into the next section. There's things in the privacy impact assessment, PIA, that you might have to do if you launch a digital product. Includes things like encryption at rest and encryption in transit. Encryption in transit is an easier concept. It's basically what you call an SSL certificate, TLS, which is the little lock in the top of your browser. And then there's also encryption at rest, which is, so your data is encrypted at a hardware level in a server room. You don't have to know all of this. All I'm trying to say is if you knew this early, you could make those decisions. You wouldn't host with a company. You wouldn't put your website on a server that doesn't meet that standard if your privacy consultant tells you you must have this. And so this is a really, really important thing that you need to consider. Further, going into security, are your servers, should you have your servers based in Canada? So we host with CanTrust Hosting Cooperative. They're a Canadian hosting company. And so everything is in Canada. Our backups are even across the mountains. And so we try to keep our data all in Canada. There's no backups in the UK. There's no, you know, everything is kept here. And so that was a really conscious decision. There's cost associated with it. When you work with companies that are going to give you this level of data and privacy security, they're going to want you to start a little bit early as well, because this isn't just like the turn it on online setup either. So you really want to think about privacy and security early. And that's a really, really important piece. I also want to just tie back to the privacy issue. We're dealing with marginalized communities. We're dealing with the most at-risk folks. So as Valerie was saying, having our data in the States has a bunch of privacy implications, and having them mine our data is a super crappy thing. But there's even more of a safety thing that I think is super important for us to consider. I really think of my trans friends who tell me their experiences of crossing the border when they're mid-transition. And sometimes you want to identify one way or another, and you do not want that information about you necessarily available to American border guards who are not friendly people all the time, in case you haven't experienced that. So it's, we want to make sure that we're, especially as we collect sensitive information about identity, which is what CultureBrew.Art does, we want to make sure that we really respect that need for safety. And we want to protect our communities. We want to be responsible. So, and the safety goes beyond this. Like, for example, you'll notice with CultureBrew.Art, you can't see our artist database without having a login. And for us, that was a really important feature, that because if we were just showing a public profile of the artist, that would be one thing. But because we want engagers to be able to find, like, hey, we need more representation in this project. We want a queer person with this ethnic South Asian identity. This South Asian queer person might not want everyone in the world to know that they're a South Asian queer person. And I come from a South Asian background, and there's a lot of homophobia that a lot of South Asians do not even come out to their own families. So to have that publicly posted would be very dangerous, even for some of them, or just put them in a lot of conflict. And so it's important for us that they be found and they have those opportunities, but that it also, they be protected and their privacy be protected. So in our system, we actually spent extra money to build in this feature that lets you identify that way, but then decide to share it with only other artists or with engagers. You can choose which of your identity, more sensitive identity items can be shared and which are not shared. And on a bigger level, on a data security and safety level, we don't allow this to be public. And so for us, a data breach is actually a very big concern. So we took the extra measures, when the encryption at rest issue came up, Valerie was like, $20 extra a month to make sure that we can secure this data, no brainer, we're doing it. And so we make decisions that cost money that protect us in the long term. And then the other thing I wanted to flag was cybersecurity insurance. Also start that early, because that application was horrible. It's long. It's boring, it's long, it's an insurance document. Cybersecurity early, privacy early, business modeling early. That's like what my notes say. Start now if you're going to build something. Did you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I just want to build on that. All this stuff about privacy and security is really grounded in our imperative to keep artists safe, to keep Indigenous and artists safe. We know that Indigenous and Black people, and Indigenous and Black women in particular, are targets for online harassment. So we really wanted to ensure everything we do, we're trying to make sure that the safety is paramount of the people of our community who are going to be in this site. And so as Andrew mentioned, ensuring that the data is stored on Canadian servers, that's not just like some patriotic, we need to keep it in Canada. But if people are aware, in the United States, like after 9/11, they passed the Patriot Act, which allows the federal government, the American federal government, to tell private companies to give them whatever information they want. They can protest, but in the end, the federal government has that right to people's private information. And we wanted to ensure that we even had to go one further, because American companies, Amazon and some other big hosting companies, they set up Canadian subsidiaries of their companies to try to get around that. But then the American government passed another law that allowed them to even get the information of American companies, even if the data is stored in Canada. So there's a lot of legal stuff that you need to know about in order to, if you want to ensure safety of the data, and which means the safety of the people whose data you have been entrusted in, there's a lot of things you need to find out from your privacy consultant and from your lawyer. The other thing about safety, and Andrew sort of talked about this too, we're also like wanting to do that within the idea of community. So Andrew mentioned that, we've set up different levels of consent or permission for artists to share more sensitive information. And we were thinking of like, trans artists or artists who identify as queer, yes, they can restrict that information from being seen by, just Joe Blow engager trying to find an artist, or they can restrict it to just the wider community who are in CultureBrew.Art. But in interest, like we said, when we were in that consultation room with all those queer artists who are going, oh my God, like, who are you? I didn't know you existed. Like, we need to talk. Like, for us to set up a space online where artists could do that, we also have one where where they can give consent to only the artists in CultureBrew.Art who share a similar identity, so that queer artists could say, well, I don't want the wider CBA CultureBrew.Art community to know that I'm queer, but I still want to connect with other Indigenous and racialized artists who are also queer, so that I can find my community. So that was a thing we put in. This is how consultation can help increase safety while building community.
Great. Yeah, I want to jump into accessibility just again for the sake of time. There are workshops in this series that talk about accessibility, so I'm not going to go super in depth with it. Also, I don't feel this is, I feel like well, I'm going to start with saying, if you're going to do consultation and work in areas such as accessibility, hire somebody who has this experience. Lived experience is very important, and pay them and work closely with them to do this kind of stuff. So the way that we approached accessibility was we worked with a firm that I believe is based in Toronto that does testing specifically in the area of accessibility for digital tools. And so that was a really fantastic experience with me. I ran the tests and I would go into the sessions with, a user or a tester that was like either paraplegic or quadriplegic or fully blind or fully deaf. And we would go through our system and they would tell me exactly what their experiences were. Some of them were like just, even simply low vision. And it was incredible to watch and to talk through that experience. We learned so much from it, and realizing that, the standard is like the WCAG 2.0 is like I think the standard right now, or maybe it's gone up recently, but the standard that is currently in,
and then because it's 2.0,
there's
AA, and then there's AAA,
and then there's AAA. Yeah, so AA and AAA, for example, one of the defining features that we struggle with our developers was meeting a AA standard meant a certain contrast level, which passed on all these machine readable accessibility tools. But for us, AAA was a better standard to follow, because the contrast actually didn't just consider what passes as contrast for a really specific type of contrast need, but actually is also just for low vision. I think low vision gets left out of accessibility quite a bit. When we talk about accessibility, we go to extreme needs and accessibility, but we also have to think of just like, aging eyes, for example, was a part of us. So AAA, we want to go for the higher standard. The cost of really accommodating these really deeper accessibility needs is high. It's not cheap to build in these functions and these features and these capabilities. So we've actually been writing grants specifically to do this disability support work for our site. So making sure that things are more accessible, hiring disability consultants, and consulting with those communities specifically. It has been a really difficult area for us to really go deep in, because Valerie and I don't have that lived experience. I think the main reason why we don't have as much access to those communities. And then when we do have access to those communities, we're still learning. And so accessibility, when you're centering community and equity, we've talked about a few things, and I feel like we've talked about them separately. We talked about, trans identities and genderqueer identities and race and gender we've touched on, but really what we need to keep in mind is intersectionality. So when we talk about intersectionality, the experience of a racialized person with, chronic pain or disabilities is very different than a non-racialized or Indigenous person with those same disabilities. So I think it's important that we, again, go back to the user. They're the expert. If we want to serve them, that we consult with them. Yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about accessibility right now. I think, what is his name? Sean. Yeah, Sean is doing a workshop. I think Victoria can speak to it more at the end. But there are some workshops happening in that topic.
I want to add that one other aspect of accessibility is financial. I think that that was another, when we talk about equity and decolonization and knowing our community, we have, we also considered that artists don't make a lot of money even before the pandemic hit, and Indigenous and racialized artists make even less money because of the cycles of systemic racism means there's fewer opportunities, and so accessibility in terms of accessing the site was, when we're thinking about sustainability and, wanting to ensure that there is some revenue from the site, we also did specific things to make sure that Indigenous and racialized artists, no matter what their financial situation, would always be able to get in if they wanted to. So we have it set up that, it's $25. We made it like, a fairly accessible price for artists to be part of CultureBrew.Art. But if they're having a bad year or they just can't afford the $25, we've found a way, we will always accept artists who want to be in it. And part of that accessibility kind of equation and how we push back against sort of capitalistic ideas about how we monetize a site. I want to just have an example of going back to when we had some conversations with our business consultant. And we were, early in the conversation about how much it would cost for artists to be in versus how much it would cost for engagers to subscribe to the site, to access the artist profiles. And, we were talking about the $25 entry fee and the various kinds of features we would be adding afterwards, to make the site even more usable for the artists to build community. And someone in the meeting, so there was 4 of us in the meeting, and someone said, oh, well, it's a common practice that, because we were talking about the way searches are found. If someone says, I want to find a Black actor between the ages of 20 and 30, and what you get your results, your search results. And someone said, well, maybe somebody could pay an extra, $5 a month, to make sure that their profile shows up first. And I sat there going, I felt this thing in my stomach, and I went, I knew it didn't feel right at all. And I said, that's exactly the kind of thing we don't want to do already. That means that somebody with more money can make sure they show up at the top of the list. How is that equity? How is that respecting that not everybody has the same opportunities? And I said no. And the business consultant looked at me, and I could see, because he was a white guy. Frankly, we had to, the business consultant, we asked around, and this white guy was recommended to us, older. He actually was American, a big guy. And he's sitting in the room and he's looking at me. And all of a sudden, his face cracked into this big grin. And he says, "Oh, I see." He goes, "You want to create a premium service for everybody." I go, "Yes. I don't want to create, these different levels of access so that people with more money can get something better. We want everybody to get the better." So Andrew, what are the qualities or qualifications that artists have that allow them to be more successful when building digital tools, and perhaps BIPOC artists particularly? And you did touch on this a little bit in the earlier section, but maybe you can just jump on that again.
Yeah, I love this question because I strongly am I'm an artist and I'm an arts administrator, and I've been working in the arts, for over 15 years, since 2004, 2005, in an administrative role. And I have been an artist, well, you could say since my first concert with Fred Penner when I was 6 years old. But I have been doing art my whole life. And then as I completed my philosophy degree, I had a focus in logic and philosophy of science. And I ended up finding myself working in technology. It was a natural transition. Technology is logic. And so I've been working on my skills as a developer, doing programming, software development. Valerie knows all this, IT project management, working in IT as well. And I've learned through this process that there is something very, very unique about artists building digital technology. And it really excites me when I think of this. And like I said, when we show up at the table with tech people and developers, they look at us, they're like, "Oh, you're artists, like you don't know what you're doing." They are so wrong. They are so absolutely wrong, because the philosophies of software development in the 80s and the 90s, the way software was built was done in this, what they call the waterfall method, and there's other names for it. They basically built software in a way that it wasn't responsive or iterative, and they just put a lot of resources into outputting this one big tool. And, in the 80s, there was this or 90s, there was this really big fail on a product, a Windows product called Windows Me, or Microsoft Me. It failed so bad, nobody even remembers it. Whenever I tell this story, they're like, "What?" Because it was such a fail. And it was I feel that was a really big turning point when people went, "We can't keep working this way." We spent 18 months or 2 years developing this product, and we launch it and it flops so bad because it hasn't been tested. It hasn't been affirmed to be needed by the user. And they moved into this new methodology and technology called Agile, which you're going to hear a lot about. And Agile, essentially, in a nutshell, basically says the way that we should build technology is in an iterative process of these cycles. So the idea is that you have an idea, you do proof of concept, you test it, you get feedback, you improve it, and you keep on doing these improvement cycles. This is the artistic process. And so artists, by nature, this is how we work. We work in a way where we are always responding, we're improving, we are cycling everything back. And I think that is super interesting to me. And as BIPOC artists in particular, we bring things to the table that I think is a little bit difficult for other people to bring when we build technology. For me, it's a very natural thing to build software and platforms. This is why I love doing this kind of work, and why I, all the projects that I consult on, I truly deeply enjoy them. And it's because of this process. And, we're resilient. We're not afraid. We're going to keep pushing through, because there's really difficult moments in building platforms and software. And as BIPOC artists, we know how to push through. Anyone who's an artist knows what it's like to stay up till 6 a.m. the night before a performance or an exhibition or an installation. I've done it. I've, spent 16, 20-hour days working on projects. And so for me, that push, that resilience is there. There's also, being really good with resources. So, and being really mindful. There's something about being artists, and BIPOC artists in particular. We know how to manage projects. We know how to execute projects, and we know how to use our resources well. And then there's the creativity and the problem solving. which specifically to me relates to something called ambiguity tolerance. I feel artists have very high ambiguity tolerance, and arts administrators have very high ambiguity tolerance. So if we don't know what's going to happen next, we don't really freak out as much. I think it's because of the fact that we live on grants and the fact that we depend on these different funders. And so we don't know when the next grant is going to come in. We don't know if we're going to get it, yet we still keep going. We don't even know, like, you know, every time there's like a new government elected at the federal level, I feel like all of us kind of go, because we don't know what's going to happen to our funding. And yet we continue. We've all dedicated our lives to this sector. That's pretty phenomenal. And I think that we bring that into when we build software. And I find that when I work with tech people, especially developers, they get very nervous when it's ambiguous. And I think this harms their ability to be highly responsive. And so when we come to the table, we can support them to say, it's okay. Things are going to change. There is no, I keep getting asked, I always get asked from developers, I need the final copy. I'm like, what is this final copy you're talking about? There is no such thing as final copy. I don't believe in it. It's a myth, because it's always going to change. There's always going to be something that we learn. There's always going to be something that's going to change in the future. So I really think that we need to be really proud of our sector. We need to be really proud of our skills. And I think, again, we need to come to the development table when we work with developers. And we need to really say, this is how we work. And we know this. We don't know, maybe we don't have, like, I have the technical background, but most of us don't have the strong technical background, yet we know how to build things. Software and web building and platform building is just creation, and we are experts in creation. So I think, yeah, I'm very passionate about this and I strongly believe in it, and I see evidence of it every single day on the multiple projects that I work on, that this is a fact, that we bring this thing to it. So yeah, I think that those are the,
yeah, those are all excellent points, Andrew. I just want, you know, so creativity for sure, because there's so many times where, you know, the developer sorry, I got muted somehow. White supremacy, no. I just, where was I? I was going to say, oh yeah, the developer would come to us and present us with something. We go, oh, this isn't what we were expecting or wanting, or things move quickly in our world, you know, especially politically. Things evolve really quickly, and you go, nope, that was fine like 2 months ago, but now it's not. And so we need to respond to that somehow. And of course, you have constraints of budget, we have constraints of time. So our creativity is super valuable in those times, because even if you're not a tech expert like me, you know, you can see, you know, that there are other options. There's, you know, you can throw out, you know, well, what if we did this? And the developer might go, oh, you know, they hadn't thought of those things. And so, you know, once, and that also brings up another key point that artists are really good at, and that is collaboration. I think that, you know, we have to remember that this skill we've developed of working with other artists, of working together to create something out of nothing, really, because, you know, it's just an idea. And, you know, artists are amazing for collaborating, especially in theater, because that's my main experience. So, you know, all these disparate artists with different perspectives and different lived experiences can create something pretty magnificent. And so the same applies to tech. I think that one of the issues that we keep talking about or bringing up is that tech is not actually very collaborative in that way. You know, they work with each other, but when it comes to the client, they seem to be less collaborative. And so that's going to take some work and also some getting used to, because if you're used to working in a particular way and someone isn't working collaboratively, it's really difficult to go, oh, was it just us? And that's where the self-gaslighting comes in, because we go, oh, maybe we weren't making ourselves clear, or maybe, you know, I don't know, there's all sorts of maybes that we spent a lot of time trying to sort through. But I think that what Andrew is saying is having the confidence about the kind of skills that we are also bringing to the table that are also valuable, and not just valuable, but essential to making the product successful. We have to really hang on to those things, because it does get challenging, not just once in a while, but throughout the process.
Yeah, and I just want to make one slight clarification that when you say that tech is not collaborative, you mean in our experience on this project. Yeah. And that's something that's really important to me because I'm a tech person and I work in a very collaborative way, but I also work from an arts informed approach. So I think that this is why we need more advocates and more skilled people who have these digital skills in our sector. And I think we're starting to see that slowly happen. I just want to move on to the next item, which is choosing a developer. So thinking about choosing a developer with all of this in mind, you just want to be really careful that you choose the right developer. So when you interview them or you put out your RFP, I think, so developer language, you're really looking, if you're looking to work in the way that Valerie and I are describing, which is iterative and you can apply your learning and it won't be a shock when you want to change the copy in a month. They're not going to go, what? If you want them to be participating in that type of engagement, then you really want to choose a developer that, in my opinion, works in Agile and that is open to, developers that are experienced with either the arts sector or at least the nonprofit sector, and who will be able to understand how you work. And I think that another thing that I'm finding with choosing developers is just, even in your early interviews, just check to see, are they listening to you? Are they able to hear you? And when they say they work in Agile, which most of them are going to say, because it's a bit of a buzzword, just double check that. Confirm the theory that they're working in this really iterative way. You can ask direct questions like, how would you feel if we built something and we realized after testing that it was, it went the wrong direction? How would you feel about making those adjustments? How would that affect our budget, which is the cost overages item I want to talk about? When we make these changes, one thing that happens is I find when we choose a developer, they'll say, oh, we want to work in Agile, yet they'll budget you in this really waterfall way, this traditional way of being like, this is the project, this is what we're going to build, this is the budget attached to it. Just make sure in your interview process that you bring up the idea of saying, well, if I want to make changes, does your budget allow for that flexibility? Does this quote include that process? Because if the quote doesn't include the process of testing and iteration, that's a big sign of a problem. And I think that's where our overages really happened on our project, was like, we would learn things. So, you build a module for the queer community, you test it, you realize you made mistakes because you don't have that lived experience of every single person, which you can't. The response we got when we wanted to iterate on that and make changes was a little bit strong because it took us out of budget. So when you're choosing a developer, you really want to make sure the way you want to work is really clear and the way that they want to work is in line with how you want to work. And the vendor-client relationship, I find very unhelpful. I really like working with developers who want to join a product team. They want to be part of the team to make your product successful. And so when it becomes very highly vendor-client with that big line in the middle, I find that there's not as much support and buy-in. And I guess that kind of ties into the working with developers items there. I think that I've really touched on that quite a bit. But yeah, having a strong RFP that describes, I feel like a lot of RFPs are always saying what you want built, but how you want to work is actually a really big piece as well. Valerie, did you want to add anything there to choosing or working with developers?
Yeah, just to add, for the people who don't know what RFP is, it's a request for proposal. So it's a way for people to basically put in a bid for working with you. And you also probably have that experience. Like when we worked with our first technical advisor, he suggested doing a limited RFP. So instead of making it a public thing where, people from all over the world might apply to work with you as a developer. He did some initial research about finding developers that he thought might work within our budget, who had experience working with nonprofits or, worked basically even in the platform, right? Because different developers work in different kinds of technology or base code. And so that's another piece that we probably should have talked about previously, is what base code are you going to choose to work in? And the tech advisor can help you decide what that's going to be. So maybe you could just sort of touch on that a bit, Andrew.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really funny thing because tech people get very weird about what technologies and CMSs and platforms they work in. I've been learning a lot of Ruby coding, and a couple of my friends lately are just like, screw Ruby, but a lot of things are built in Ruby. So I don't think it's the role of us when we're creating these projects to determine the technologies at the beginning. I think it's something that, again, tech advisor, or even the developer, like in response to the RFP, I would expect the developer to propose technologies to build it, especially if you don't have a prototype. So, for example, technologies like React are very, very responsive, highly responsive and very fast, but it's volatile. And so for really, if you need stability, you might not choose that technology. And then you get Drupal and WordPress, which are like the big things. WordPress, for everyone's reference, can do much more than just like be a website. It's actually been really developed at a deeper level to do a lot of things. There's a lot of platforms built out of WordPress, but then there's a lot of vulnerabilities in it. There's less community accountability around WordPress than, for example, Drupal. But you just heard my bias. I work in Drupal primarily, so you just saw me do exactly what I warned you about, which is developers are going to have their preferences and they're going to push for them. And so, I would say that, when you get those RFPs or those proposals, or a tech advisor starts to tell you, perhaps these are the technologies we should work in, do a little bit of research yourself as well. I find very new technologies, I get nervous, like something that's like brand new and out the gate, that's like, oh, this is the new thing. I'm always worried that it's going to disappear, or it's going to become obsolete or fall out of favor really quickly. So I think for choosing technologies, that's really where you are relying on the tech people and the developer and the advisors. Google is great. Google's not great. Google's evil and horrible, but Googling to get information about technologies is great. So if you Google what is Drupal, and it'll explain to you what it is. And then if you Google what is Ruby on Rails, and it'll explain to you what it is, and you can get some basic information.
Yeah, and just building on that, just going back to the idea of security again, like as Andrew talked about, like a newer platform or coding language could be introduced, but is there longevity in systems? Because these systems have to be continually updated for securities. I mean, we live in an age where hacking of some of what you think was the most high secure databases or computer networks in the world are being hacked, like the Pentagon and the Treasury Department of the US. If those folks are getting hacked, we have a responsibility to make sure that the system we choose to work in has regular security updates. I mean, that's part of the sort of sustainability question as well. It's like, once you've built it, it doesn't mean like you're done with, you still have to pay a monthly fee that covers the security upgrades that are constantly being put into these systems in order to make sure that hackers don't come in and find a vulnerability that then opens up your site to all sorts of problems.
Yeah, great point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I totally forgot about it. But everyone, especially when I work in a consulting role, there's a big surprise that after we put all this money into building this thing, there's ongoing costs every month or quarterly to maintain your site. It's usually called the maintenance fee. And so just a heads up that it's not like you build it and it's done, you have ongoing work. And that work, that maintenance fee just does security updates. Then there's like, you know, an update could actually make one of your modules or your plugins, depending what software you're using, obsolete, or it could make it not compatible anymore. Browser changes like Chrome and Internet Explorer and Firefox, things change, and sometimes your code and your site has to change. So that's why I think a lot of people like CMSs, content management systems like Drupal and WordPress, because those systems have built into them the ability to adapt to these changes. But still, even as someone with experience, I still have this nerve-wracking moment every time I do maintenance. It's, you know, even on something as simple as a WordPress site, I'm always like, what's going to break this time? And like, so you do need to plan for those ongoing costs. And that kind of ties into the next item, which is working and collaboration agreement, which is as we think about all of the things that are necessary in terms of ensuring that we can build a successful product. There's this big piece here that I feel I'm really struggling with on projects, which is managing developer expectations of people like us, specifically arts and nonprofits folks and organizations, when we build these products. And so developers, like, they do this every day. I assume you're working with a developer that every day their job is to build things, and they're very, very entrenched in this. And so sometimes I've been finding that developer expectations are that you also are as entrenched, as involved in this. They forget that we have grant writing season. Like, they forget that like October is hell. It's good timing for Halloween, because that's what October feels like with all the grant deadlines. And like March and April are really difficult for us. Like, we have times when it's literally like everything is due all at once. And developers will sometimes just be like, well, we need this. And I think it's really important when you do your working and your collaboration agreements with your developers that you set those expectations early, like to remind them that, you know, I'm assuming most projects in our sector are going to be people that have 5 other jobs. You know, they have to supervise staff, they have to attend meetings, they have to go to this conference, they have to write 10 grants. And when you're working with developers and tech folks, I think it's really important to remind them, like, this is not all I do. So I found something that I'm starting to put into place now with all of my projects is asking the developer to give a minimum of 2 to 3 weeks notice when they need things. So you need copy, give us notice. We're not going to give you this copy the next day. And just planning for that. This Valerie just made a face because that was her, where they would go, we need this tomorrow. And she's like, but I have 5 grants due. So this is
because I'd asked them 2 months earlier when I wasn't doing anything, like, can I do copy now? And they go, oh, there's lots of time later. And then the later would be, we need it tomorrow. And I just go, oh.
And so I think that, you know, we really want to make sure that developers don't, if the developer is not experienced working with nonprofits and arts folks and organizations, they're not going to understand this. Like, to them, there's often in developer agreements, there's this like client responsibility section, which always makes me laugh, because they're basically saying like, you know, it's your job to respond to us. But then we have to establish early on to say, what does that mean? And that doesn't mean that, you know, in my busiest time, you give me the bulk of the workload. So be careful of that timeline that you get from the developer right up front. Look at it carefully. And if everything is falling in September, October, which is our big grant season, maybe go back to the developer and just say, hey, can we change this? Establish right up front that you need this many weeks notice to provide feedback, copy. The other thing that I find that working with developers, I would recommend establishing ahead of time is testing. So because we consult with communities, especially when you're consulting with marginalized communities, if you want to test a piece or a section of your build, as you all know, you're not just going to be able to call up all of your friends who work in other arts organizations to say, hey, tomorrow, can you test this? Like, you're going to have to book them in advance. So give yourself a big window for testing and feedback and to be able to give that to the developer. And then the final thing I want to warn you about in your timeline is at the end of your build, when your contract is about to end, there's a warranty period. That's the period where you can test your software, put in any bug tickets, and they will fix them, but only within the warranty period. I think there's a strong misunderstanding that if a developer builds you something, that anything that breaks for the rest of your software life or web platform life, they're going to fix. That's not how it works. There is a point when they say, this is the warranty, here's the bugs, and you have to report them. And after that, you're going to pay for it. So that sounded like a threat. I didn't mean to be like, you're going to pay for it, but you know, you're going to have to, they're going to charge you for it. And so I would say that warranty period, I found that a very stressful time because you have like in your contract, it'll say, but let's average is about 30 days. You really want to do a lot of deep testing. That's when, you know, it's important to test things like, oh, this doesn't work on Internet Explorer. This doesn't work on my cell phone, on my Android phone, but it worked on my iPhone. You really want to get as many of your users as possible using it and submitting bugs to you so you can give them to the developer. So when you're talking about working and collaboration agreements, it has to include the reality of being from this sector included in how we work together. They're not going to know that.
And I just want to add, because Andrew's brought up the idea of agreements and contracts, is you need to have money to pay a lawyer to review those contracts for you. There's usually large amounts of money that are involved. You want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence and being responsible to your funders who have invested in you and your product. And so you need to find a lawyer who understands how the tech field works. You know, don't get a real estate lawyer, don't get a family divorce lawyer, like get somebody who works in tech. We were also fortunate that the lawyer we had access to not only understands tech, but she's also a copyright lawyer and has experience in human rights and working in the nonprofit sector. And so having a lawyer who understands your needs as a nonprofit or as an artist, and you know what you're able to manage if things go south, because a good lawyer will be looking at what happens if things go wrong, you know. And we were lucky because, you know, we frankly are on our second developer. We had a first developer and we had issues, and eventually we had to say, we can't work with this developer any longer. How do we get out of this situation? So the lawyer you worked with would have made sure that the contract had a way for you to get out, and to make sure that all the work and the copyright that you had before is yours so that you can take it to the next developer. So yeah. Have money in your budget to pay a good lawyer.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into the last item in this section before we take our break, which is cost overages, which we experienced. So I'm going to blame some of the cost overages on not being heard. As I said right at the beginning, we lost a lot of time and money with things as simple as like, here's the list of racial and ethnic identities, and then them building it and sending it back with like their own terminology, which we were like minds were blown. Like, why are these people just changing it? And we're still experiencing that to this day. And then there was, the cost of that was also the emotional labor. Like, we were just stressed because we're like, when you're gaslighted, you're like, is it me? Like, is it something I did? And it's like, no, they just didn't follow through. So that's one thing in the cost overages is you can do your best to be clear as possible, but insist on being heard during your build. The other cost overages are things I described earlier, which is when you engage a developer, when you talk about working in agile versus, you want to work in this iterative way, make sure that their budget allows for that flexibility. So make sure you ask them right away, is there going to be an opportunity for me to consult with my community and make changes? Make sure that's not going to be an extra charge, because lots of developers will say that's out of scope because there's this like separation between everyone's trying to manage scope. Everyone's trying to manage their workload. I get it. But right up front, having that conversation will save you the cost overage. If you discover you made a module for sexual orientation and you got it wrong, it won't cost you another $5,000 to change it. So that adaptability is built in. And the other area for cost overages are, there's some things that are a little bit harder to foresee. So contingency, build that into your budget. That's very, very important, into your development budget, and again, on your project budget. And then there's also a cost overage around, I think there's the whole piece around the warranty and the testing, which if you don't manage to, like it, because, you know, we're all overstretched, we're all stretched, we're under-resourced. You might not have done the testing in time in the warranty or during the period, the testing period in your timeline, and you have to do it later and you discover there's a bug. That's a cost overage that you cannot necessarily avoid. So plan for that as well. And then there's all these costs that we haven't even talked about that are associated with these projects on your end. So your time, hiring people. When you do testing, when we do testing, we pay people. So we pay people $50 or $75 to test with us for 1 hour. Well, this is how we use the software. What do you think? Consultation costs money. So Valerie's mentioned lawyers, privacy consultants, business consultants. So these things can start to add up. If you push your privacy too late, you might pay 15 grand, like that one client I have did. But if you do it on time, it might not go over. But you do need to plan for the fact that, you know, something could happen in your organization and it can really set you off. So those are where the cost overages primarily come from. Can you think of somewhere else, Valerie, where the cost overages like caught us by surprise?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that having a healthy contingency just for the tech development is really important to have in your budget, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's the main thing. Like, you can hire a tech advisor, but, you know, because we had a very certain vision about community building in our site, which means that the artists need to connect with each other. So an internal messaging system, and we need an internal messaging system for the engagers to be able to, you know, they do a search, they come up with their search results has like 6 artists that they want specifically to contact. You know, they need to be able to contact those artists through the site. And so we're going, oh yeah, we need a messaging system so that they can connect with each other. But we didn't think about, you know, we didn't think one step further, was like, well, how would they know there's a message for them if they're not logged into the site? Which meant that there needed to be an email notification to people letting them know, hey, you have a message in CultureBrew.Art, log in to like see your message. But because we, you know, we're not technology builders and we weren't thinking that far, we were suddenly left in this place where they went, well, that wasn't in like the contract, and so that's going to cost you extra. And we went, but the site is useless if people don't know there's a message for them. So, you know, not only was there the cost overage in like the actual cost of building that other bit, but there's the cost overage of, you know, our time and meeting with the developer and negotiating these things and like, you know, figuring out a budget for that and going back and forth. So all of those cost money, because we believe in paying people for their time.
Great. I think that's a sobering note to take a break on. And I hope that everyone is feeling, I hope that you're not feeling nervous about this. We're trying to be realistic. We want to share an honest perspective of what our experience was. And we really deeply do not want anyone to deal with the challenges that we had. So we're really trying to save everyone from the same pitfalls. But there are great things about building a platform, and we'll get into them after the break. So Valerie, you had some things to say before we jumped into our next topic, right?
Yeah, I realized once we hit the break that there were so many things to talk about, but going back to the safety aspect and privacy and security, I just wanted to emphasize how important it is to spend the time and the resources to create a really good terms of service agreement that people will have to agree to. I mean, everyone's familiar with terms of service. You have to agree to them for practically everything you subscribe to online. But it is really important to protect not only the people who are using the site, but to protect you so you know what you're liable for or what you, and again, terms of service is also important to, consult with the privacy consultant, because again, want to make sure you limit the amount of personal sensitive information that you collect, because not only does that increase your liability, but it also, there's a lot of times that you don't need that information at all. And then a code of conduct is also really important. Ours is, we decided to go a little bit simpler, but it was basically don't harass people, don't bully them, or you're off the site. It's basically don't harm other people. And a way to, a place for people to contact you to report any sort of inappropriate behavior, when the people are engaging with each other on the site. So yeah, that's another thing that you have to put in time, before the site opens up, it will inform what information or what you do in the site. So again, these are things you need to do early on. Okay, on to the next section.
Yeah, the next section is, I think, one of the most fun parts of building software and platforms, which is UX design and design. So yeah, Valerie, did you want to kick this off? Yeah.
What is UX? And why is it so important? And how does it differ from just basic website design?
Yeah, so UX, it stands for user experience. And what it really is a way to understand how the experience of the user is when they use your platform or your site. And I think it is an extremely important part of building any sort of digital platform or tool. It differs from design because design and UX are very related. Actually, they have a really strong relationship because good design is going to lead to good UX. And but design is a little bit different, where there's things that are design focused that could be excellent design and bad UX, for example. So design is really the aesthetics. Design really incorporates branding. And that's a very important piece that we didn't talk about early on, but branding is something I would also suggest you pursue early on. If the developers have your color palette, your style guide, your font family, all of that stuff to consider when they're building your tool, you're going to save time and money throughout the project, because you'll actually see it's a little bit easier to test and to give feedback when you can visually see how it's going to look. So wireframes are very difficult, I feel, for a lot of people. And there is this whole philosophy in software development where people are saying, throw away the wireframes, let's just go to prototyping, because they're finding that users and testers are not responding well to imagine it does this. So if you can give your developer your style guide early, your branding guide early, then you're probably going to get more realistic ideas of what it's going to look like. So like business, like privacy, like security, start branding early and design early. So UX is really about the user's experience. And there's lots of ways that people talk about user experience. And some people find the language sometimes a little bit hippie-ish. And then people react to things like empathy maps, which is a very common way of looking at UX, where they're like, oh, that's such a hippie term to call it an empathy map. But what it's really meant to do is it's really trying to incorporate, when we create software and web products, that we consider the full experience of the user. So when we talk about UX, it's not just like, I can read this and the contrast is high. It's also, how do you feel? That's where the empathy map concept comes from. It's like the feeling of the user can be strong in one way or another. So I find this very interesting because I do a lot of testing. I really enjoy this part of my work, testing with users to get their feedback. And I find that when it comes to user experience, I have to have them on video and watch them work through the system, because they lie. Like our testers, they lie to us. And I had, I did a test a while ago for a project I was consulting on. And I asked the tester, like, oh, how do you feel about this? And they wanted to make me feel good. And they said something, and their body language and their face, I was like, that's not true. So I pushed them and I pushed them, and we finally got to the truth where they were like, this is very frustrating. This is making me feel this way. That's really important that we consider that. UX cares about the experience of the user. UX cares about how the user feels, their relationship to the product. When you feel good and you look at it, certain colors maybe make you show up and say, oh, this was a good experience or this was a bad experience. And I think that that's a really, really important piece of how we build. If we want to be able to have them come back, we want to make them want to come back. And then when it comes to your brand, your product is selling your brand. And so you want to make sure those associations are positive. Unless you're trying to build like an evil site, in which case you want the associations to be negative, or if you're trying to build a site that's meant to be very, like I find a lot of these cyber security websites, like they're trying to scare you, and they do a good job of doing that. Like they're like, you arrive on the site and it's all scary and it's like, okay, I need to act. And so you really have to think of the function of your site. In our case, our site intended to build community and to make you feel included. So one big thing that Valerie really pushed back on when it came to UX was, for example, kind of like the slide here, having a lot of white space. If we're telling BIPOC folks that this is your space and all we're giving them is white space, which is very corporate and very reinforcing that whiteness is the dominant thing, we're really sending a message. So we opted to have the background be brown for the artists and to really show that saturation and depth of color was a really important value that we had, which reiterated some of the work that we're doing. So yeah, I can't even stress the importance of UX. And talking about cost overages, bad UX cost us a lot of money as well. So good UX is really important. I think the person who originally did our UX had really excellent intentions, but did not have the experience of doing UX for a platform, a logged in platform. This person had experience doing UX for web design, restaurants, and things like that, where you land, you want it to be clean, it's very corporate. We needed somebody who knew UX from a logged in user perspective. And we've spent, I'd say like $80,000 almost just pretty much fixing UX issues. I don't know if you disagree with that, Valerie, but
yeah, I don't know if I could put a price on it. It was expensive. But I also want to add that, UX isn't just colors and fonts and design, or how it makes you feel from, whether excited or scared or call to action. But UX for me, and, again, this speaks to about us being experts in our own experience. I think we've all had the experience where we've gone onto a website and we didn't know where to go next, or you're looking for something specifically and they force you to look everywhere to find like how you can contact somebody or phone somebody because they're intentionally hiding stuff or it's just bad design. And so and I know personally that there's sometimes I've gone somewhere with every intention of purchasing something or finding out about their product or their service, and was so frustrated about trying to find what I needed that I just went, forget it. Like I'm leaving, like I'm never coming back because this is too frustrating experience. I don't have the time. And there's other people out there offering a similar product or can offer something what I need. And so it is, UX is also navigation. It's about, the logic of, what step comes next, what the next call to action is. How can I easily find the things that I need to find in order to feel confident that this site, is secure and has my safety in mind and shares my values.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Thank you for adding that. The big thing with UX versus design is also, the way that you're walking through. And a lot of people will approach this through what they call a customer journey. or a customer journey map or a client map. And it's basically how you're going to walk through the entire site. And for us, we noticed that the reason UX cost us so much is exactly what Valerie said. It wasn't just like changing a color, though that was part of it as well. It was also the tech. And that's a lot of extra cost when you don't early on have a good UX person to guide you, because these are things that we could not foresee. We needed the help of a strong UX expert to tell us that, like, when people land here, they typically want to know this. And there is an iterative process. We had some of our UX fixed, and then we ran into new UX issues. But you know, because we have capacity, I was able to build those repairs at this point. So it didn't cost us as much, but without those technical skills and development, we would have had to pay someone to fix that yet again. And so we were noticing that artists were landing on our site, and the new UX fixed them to show them what they need to do, but they weren't finding the publish button to publish their profile. So we had all these active members with unpublished profiles, because we allow for published and unpublished status. So the fact that this button was just missing, and the UX person we have is great, and she missed this because she's not a user. So we had to have the users give us that feedback, and then we could apply it. And our responsiveness, I think, is a big selling point for us being able to build this software well. We listen and we respond, and then we have some inside skills that we can apply these things. We actually did a bunch of work yesterday, which I would call that UX work, Valerie, what we did yesterday, the pages that we built. We basically built out navigation where if you land on a certain page, it'll redirect you to other pages. And we were doing on the fly UX work. We are not experts, but we are users, and we hear the feedback, people landing and going, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, or you get stuck, because, you know, when something's interactive, sometimes you get to a place where you get to a screen, a window, and yeah, there's no obvious way to go back or, you know, go somewhere different. And so that's what we were doing last night. We spent like an hour like going, oh, someone ended up here, and it doesn't say what to do. And so we just basically rewrote some of that stuff. And this is like the luxury I have of having somebody as skilled as Andrew on my team, was because, yeah, we just did that ourselves
on the fly. Yeah.
But like, if you don't get to the developer and waiting for them to go put it in like the queue of when they're going to work on something next, and that probably wasn't an urgent thing, so they probably wouldn't have done it for like at least a week or maybe 2 weeks. So
yeah. I think I think that kind of covers UX. For design and marketing, I mean, I did talk a little bit about design. I mean, I don't think we need to go too much into design. I think that most of you know how design works, and get a good designer and like the design. The only thing I would say is get your branding done early for the reasons I mentioned, so that in your mock-ups, you can actually have your branding and your colors represented, which is highly valuable. And for marketing, I mean, I don't know why we wrote it. It's just this little point. Marketing is actually massive. So I don't know if we're gonna dive into marketing right now. Just based on the time, I'm gonna suggest we maybe come back to marketing at the end if people want to get into it, because there's a whole realm of like SEO and Google ads and Facebook ads and automated marketing automation that I think we should go into only if there's interest. So if everyone's good, I'll move ahead. Yeah, so completing the project. Yay, the project is done.
Sort of. I don't think it's ever done. As we said before, it's never quite done. So when I started down this digital road, I was aware of the concept of beta testing, and that some sort of testing would be involved for quality assurance. But I didn't understand the complexity of the testing process when a digital tool is geared toward community and accessibility. So Andrew, perhaps you could tell us not only why testing is important, but why it's important to consider who is testing.
Yeah, I would agree that testing is a really big part of the work. And the idea of, so first of all, there's philosophies of testing that I'm very, very interested in, that in the world of software and digital development, I watched this amazing lecture that really talked about how testing, the way it's done traditionally, so the way that we tested and the way that, like, I would say most projects like this test, is you get to a stage. So let's say you build out your mock-ups, or like, you know, your first level MVP. So MVP means minimum viable product, basically what you need to launch. They test at that point, and then they grab a group of like 12 or 15 people, and then you run rigorous testing, and then you take all the feedback and you give it to the developer, and then you adjust. And that's when you start your iteration. I'm getting really interested in the idea of, and this does relate to your question of why it's important to consider who is testing, even though it looks like I'm going away from it, I'm coming back. There's this new philosophy of testing that I'm finding really, really interesting, and I'm trying it out for the first time now, which is to do weekly testing, which means that every single week you work with 1 or 2 people and you get feedback. And this goes on for the life cycle of your product. And the idea is that instead of doing bulk testing, which traps people in time, context, like for example, in November, late November, early December, everyone's COVID fatigue was really high. So you can imagine if you did all your testing during that time, I think you'd get a particular type of response because everyone's sick of COVID and they're sick of digital stuff. Whereas, you know, you do your testing in the summer, maybe you're going to get a different reaction. So the idea is by doing it on an ongoing basis, you're really getting a more accurate view by having your data set be representative of a full duration of time and experiences. In our community, I also find this works better, because when we want to reach out to artists and the arts sector, I feel like we need to be aware of the ebb and flow of other things happening. So it can sometimes be a little bit easier to reach out to artists on different artists every week if you're really making an artist focused site, or a different arts administrator every week, which I think works in our workflow better, because then it doesn't mean that testing will suffer because, you know, we didn't have that 2 weeks to do that testing. I also think it helps development work better and more accurately, because you're iterating on small pieces of feedback, and over time that feedback is verified. So I feel like the data is better validated when you're testing on a weekly basis over time. And it also I think reinforces the shift in the way we think of building things. It's, as you said, Valerie, it's not like we build something and it's done. This completing the project, I agree, that's not actually true. It's not just done. And so when we test on a regular basis, we're keeping in mind that the product is always evolving. And it's interesting, users are growing and adapting and evolving and changing at a faster pace than they ever have. I think no one has trouble understanding this. It's like TikTok came out, I can't even keep up. And like, so users are becoming really sophisticated. They work really fast, they adapt really fast, they're learning fast. And so we need to learn as quickly as the user. So as the user is growing and evolving and changing and adapting, we need to evolve and change and adapt. Again, why I really love this idea of ongoing testing in small sections rather than bulk testing. Why it's important to consider who is testing. So that is a really important thing. Like, we really want to make sure that we have a representative of the different groups we're testing with. So for example, in our testing, we didn't just test, you know, say, oh, we're testing a BIPOC platform and then test with like all South Asian folks. You know, we wanted to make sure that we were testing with intersectionality in mind, and people from lots of different racial ethnic identities and lots of different disciplines, so we can really understand our user. And then further, when it comes to accessibility testing, again, it had to be a diversity of perspectives, different varying levels of need. Yeah, and testing is important, because if we go back to the initial concept right at the top of the session when we're conceptualizing the project, is that the expert is the user. So if the user is the expert and we're not testing our builds and our iterations with them, then we're not verifying that we're building for the right person and that we're building the right tool. we need to keep verifying that we're building for the right person. And that top level, which I think it almost should be like a mantra written when we work, which is, why are we building this and who are we building it for? And everything should be meeting that. And so testing helps to confirm that we're building the right thing. And perhaps will tell us when something that we thought was working or that was a need maybe 6 months ago, 2 years ago, is no longer needed and needs to change.
Great.
Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, other than the fact that, again, if we're talking about equity and stuff, testing costs money, that we're paying the community members to do this process with us, to pay for their time and their expertise. So that's another thing that should be in the budget. And, you know, and then there's, in addition to the firm that had a pool of testers with different types of disabilities that were, their stories were so amazing. Like the stories Angie was telling me about, you know, how this worked for that person, or was a completely like they just, there was no way for them to interface with the site on a certain level, because there's certain things that are too fiddly for somebody who is a quadriplegic and is using, you know, their head to, you know, manage something. And if it's too small or if it's not working, I mean, Andrew can speak to that more, but that was such an eye opener to, you know, to hear the stories about how people with disabilities are, you know, interfacing with websites. And the other testing thing that we did was, so different developers do different levels of quality assurance testing. And so our first developer wasn't very good at that. And so we hired an outside testing company to do it, because, I mean, Andrew and I did a lot of testing ourselves, but a lot of times, like, I feel like I have testing trauma, because sometimes like the developers say, okay, go and test this. And we would have problems just getting into the site, let alone testing the feature that we were supposed to be testing. Like the number of hours that we wasted, you know, trying to test, putting time aside in the day to test it, you know, in the schedule so that they could like work on things, hours wasted in a really frustrating way. So at some point, we also found a company, a Canadian company, who all their testers are Indigenous folks, that they've trained them to do quality assurance testing. I think they're in New Brunswick. And so we were really excited. Again, this fits into our values of, you know, decolonization, like creating opportunities and spreading the money, because frankly, I mean, we had one contractor working with who said, you know, for a site that is meant to, you know, empower Indigenous and racialized artists, so much money is going to white men to build this technology. So we needed to find ways to try to ensure that some of the money and the resources were going to the people that we're really trying to help. And so, yeah, even that accessibility company, you know, we made sure that they also had people who are racialized, because a lot of times people go, oh, we're going to be inclusive, it's people with disabilities, and they're all white, which is not really that inclusive. So again, using that intersectional lens, yeah, with the accessibility testers and as well as with our quality assurance testers, was a really important value for us as in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I think that I think you do have testing trauma for sure. It was not easy to to test when the QA is not done. So definitely you want the QA done first. QA is quality assurance. You want the developer to hand over something that is testable. And now I really push back on developers to make sure that I just say that I'm not going to bring in testers until I'm positive that the basic functions are working. Going into the next item, which is launching. So I don't have that much to say about launching. I mean, you can do lots of things to launch. You can have a party, which we did, and it was fun. We had actually a big party where we had food from like it was so much work, but we found food from like all that represented all these different cultures. So the spread was like amazing. It was like food from like every culture that we could manage to pull together. And so you can have, you know, but there's more to launching than just like a party and being excited. There's obviously a lot of work involved. So when it comes to launching, typically you want to, I would say, in my opinion, you should build in about a month just to handle launching things. And a lot of people forget when you're building these platforms and the software, you're usually building on what's called a stage or a dev site, development site. So then these are basically environments that replicate a live environment, but they're not live. So they're not available to the public. And so you're usually doing your testing on these environments. You're usually building on these environments. And then when you go to launch, basically all that tech is being moved onto your server or to your environment that is the live environment, which is also often called production or prod. There are a lot of things that can happen between moving from stage and dev to live. And a lot of people think, oh, we've launched, we're done. I would highly advise you do a soft launch during which you do, again, testing. So when you land on your live or your production site and you're ready to go, don't throw your party the day that you go live. Don't send out all of your promotions the day you go live. Have a couple of days of testing for yourself, at least, ideally a week or 2 weeks, depending on how big of a move you're doing. And then go live and then promote it, because things can happen between those places. And that's an important testing period as well. The other part of launching would be just just making sure all of your like terms of service, privacy policy, everything is up, everything is working, because you're now in a live environment. There's a lot of other things that happen when you launch and you go to live, like for example, that's when you get into Google Ads. That's when, if you're using SEO extensively, that's when the bots start crawling your site, and you really want to make sure that all of your SEO, all that stuff is sorted. We are doing this on the fly, but we're telling you. So it's like, we're giving you advice of what we learned, which was, this is all that, a couple of mistakes that we made that we are learning now that we're sharing with you. Marketing and promotion. So marketing came up twice. I think it really wants to be included. So marketing and promotion is a big part. We just hired a communications firm because we needed help with marketing. One thing that we didn't manage to build into our system, which is, I wouldn't call it a regret, but it's too bad we couldn't. It's just the budget didn't allow for it. And also just the load of work didn't allow for it. We really missed out on marketing automation. So we missed out on the ability of, and we're going to build this into future functionality, but we missed out on the ability of when you sign up, you know, when you get those annoying emails, like you sign up and then it says the next day it goes, oh, you didn't finish, like reminder, please finish. And then a week later it goes, reminder, you still didn't finish. That whole function is missing from our platform. And so now we're doing it manually, which is a lot of work and a lot of resources. The benefit of doing it manually is perhaps now we actually know what we want to build, because the communications company came to us with marketing automation ideas, and right away we're like, what? Like, because it was like day one, you get this email, then you get this next email, and then within 2 days you get this, and in 1 week you get another one. And I was like, if you email me this much, I'm going to completely leave the platform. Like, I don't want to be harassed. And so we're able to see, based on doing it manually, to see what we want to build as an automated option. Though there is a part of me that wishes that we had included this in our first build. Anything else you want to say about marketing and promotion?
Yeah, again, it just speaks to not knowing what you don't know, right? And not anticipating these kinds of things. Like the other things that, you know, I wish that we had known about and therefore put money in the budget to cover is like, once somebody signed up, there's no sort of welcoming email, you know, that says, welcome to CultureBrew.Art. Thank you for joining our community. And these are the things you can do now that you're a member. So those kinds of, I don't want to say soft touches, but these ways that we, build connection and community. There are important things that, in a capitalistic society, like nobody just says, these are the things you want to do or need to do. And I'm sure like there are sites that sort of do that. But you're not thinking of that, when you're building this thing, there's so many other considerations that you're thinking of. So, yeah, to learn from our experience, put more in your budget to do some of these automated things, because if you're hoping that, you'll have hundreds, perhaps thousands of artists in it, you can't manually, send out an email to everybody, one at a time and say, welcome. That's something you'll want to have automated.
Great. Yeah, and then I guess with promotion and going back to something I mentioned earlier, which is building community support. So when you launch your product, you need the support of your community. And in our case, the arts sector and the nonprofit sector, we really need each other's support. And that's something that I would say, while we knew about it, like we knew partnerships and sponsorships and collaborations, even with products that are similar to us, that are doing similar things to us, was something that we might have even thought about it, but we didn't properly resource for it, I don't think. And I think it was difficult to fit it all in the budget. Like this is part of the cost that Valerie was talking about earlier, that the cost of doing this huge, big thing includes work like this, that I think we're so used to doing it, off the side of our desks, that when it's at this scale, I feel like it becomes unmanageable. And I really wish that we're trying to do this now to really reach out to the community more, but the technology really took us away from being able to do this kind of work without having dedicated resources to it.
Yeah, and that speaks to capacity. We have to remember that Visceral Visions was, until we hired Andrew, was basically me. And, and to take on a project of this size, and this was a discussion we had with the various arts councils, because the project vision was huge, but Visceral Visions was a very small company. And so we had to have, conversations with the arts councils about helping us build capacity in order to deliver a project of this size. And the great thing is that they recognize that the importance of having a project like this, led by racialized artists, and that means on a systemic level that generally these kinds of companies are small. They don't have operating funding. They don't have the same kinds of resources as, ideally, a project like this that's supposed to benefit on a sector-wise basis across the country, across multiple sectors, should be taken on by like some of the biggest arts companies in the country. But they're white-led organizations. They're not knowledgeable, and they don't have the leadership of the right people in order to do a project like this. Yet everybody recognizes there's a need for this. And yet again, it's like the people with the least resources and the least power who are trying to create technology that will help rebalance or change the dynamics of the power systems.
Yeah, which is actually something that is very sad to me, because when I think of the fact that Valerie was really pulled away from her artistic practice to do this project, and we were both really stretching ourselves very thin, reminds me of a story of a participant on one of our panels told, where there was inequity for her. She is an Indigenous theater artist. And she said, there was no opportunity for me, so I started this theater company. And she's like, and now, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, many years later, my artistic practice is non-existent or has not been nourished because I've been busy making space for people like me. And so I think there is this this is what we talked about at the beginning, which is the capacity and taking on the project and not replicating the same work over and over again, where we can combine our resources. And perhaps if another project is thinking about doing a database, but doesn't feel that they want to risk everything that we did or give up everything we did, you can work with us or with another group to collaborate on something that's already in progress. I think we need each other's support rather than replicating things. I want to move forward because that ties into comparable versus competitive products, which is something I bring up a lot. So we've had conversations on our team and with other people, and you know, there's this tendency, I think it's very capitalistic actually, it's capitalism that trained us this way, where people will come up to us and they'll go, oh my God, Andrew, or oh my God, Valerie, there's this other person that built the same thing as you. Like, oh my God. And it's like, no, there's no, oh my God. Yes, someone else built something similar to us, but the implication is that like we should be competitive. Like, oh, they built this thing and like, what are you guys doing? And how is this going to affect you? And how is this? And I think that that's a really capitalistic idea, this idea that we have to compete for a little bit. And that when someone else is doing something similar, that there's a competition, that we only have so many things we can draw on. So if people use this other database, then they won't use ours. Therefore, we can't have that audience, and therefore we're not going to be funded, and therefore our product's going to fail. Like there's all these implications that capitalism makes you go down. And as a racialized woman, I really recognize this. The minute people came to me and said, oh my God, there's somebody else doing what you're doing, we need to panic. And I was like, no, I remember this because as a racialized woman in the arts, I was told that, you know, if there's a festival, I got the one brown person spot, or I got the one woman spot on the festival. So I've been trained since I was really young that there was a pie and that we got one piece, a very, very tiny sliver, and we all have to fight for it. And I guess what I really want to push towards when I talk about comparable versus competitive products is like, screw that piece of pie, screw that whole pie. Let's have our own pie. I want the whole pie and I want to share the whole pie. And so I think when we talk about comparable versus competitive products, we don't want to compete with people who are building tools that are similar to ours. I want to see them as comparable products, that they do comparable things to us. And I think it's more interesting to pursue how we can be complementary. So in my talking with somebody who's pursuing a digital product yesterday, she brought up that they're doing something really similar, but through our conversation realized her capacity, I think I made her a bit nervous, and her capacity of building this interactive digital platform with an experience was perhaps outside of her ability. So she's actually thinking perhaps we only do a promotional website for BIPOC artists where we just promote their work and we send people to CultureBrew.Art for that integrated community logged in perspective. So there, someone could have said, oh, these are competitive products, but instead through a conversation, we found camaraderie and a way to have comparable products and to cross promote and to share that. And I think that we should be really, this is how these conversations should go. If someone's doing similar things to us, and this is across the arts, and this is across digital projects, not just building things, but other digital work we're doing, I think we should really be seeing it as, yes, we're doing the same, we're doing something similar. Let's have a conversation. Should we combine? Should we partner? Should we collaborate? Or should we cross promote? There's so many options. And yeah, this is just a really important thing to me because people just come to us in a panic. And I just want that panic to stop because that's competition and capitalism that drives us to compete with each other that is not going to take us anywhere.
Yeah.
Valerie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just feel like if we have similar goals, we should all be trying to figure out how we can work together to achieve those goals. For sure.
Yeah, it feels a bit weird to feel competitive with another product that wants to uplift BIPOC folks. Like, why? That doesn't make sense. You want to lift BIPOC folks. I want to lift BIPOC folks. We both built a thing. Let's make it work together.
Yeah.
Oh, sustainability.
Sustainability.
So we kind of broke this down into a few areas: funding sustainability, development sustainability, and then just in general organizational capacity. Valerie, do you, well, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, a big question for us, and maybe Andrew can jump in when I ask it, is like, how do we balance sustainability with accessibility for marginalized artists? And what are some of the double standards that we need to be aware of, particularly when it comes to so-called metrics of success? That's something that I think BIPOC artists, we struggle with in our artistic work as well, the idea of how do we measure success? And again, and when the grants, in terms of sustainability, are asking like how many bums and seats and how many this, and what are you going to do if you don't get the grant, and how is this going to continue? So this is a big question that we are constantly trying to figure out, especially during a pandemic.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we get pushback, not from many people, but from a few people around the $25 annual fee for BIPOC artists that we offer. So for starters, frankly, we are not going to sustain this product charging $25 a year per artist. That's not going to happen. So the $25 a year fee for CultureBrew.Art is actually more of an accountability and a commitment. It's really to get the community to understand that these things cost money to build and that they want to be part of it. And we allow for fee waivers, and we also allow for, we want to make sure it's accessible. So we have found a nice balance there.
I want to jump in and say that
sure.
that $25 fee, there's also a security aspect to that as well. Because as you know, for free places like Facebook, the amount of trolling and harassment that happens because someone has free access to a space just makes it unsafe for people of color. And so the $25 fee, it's not huge, but it might just be enough to prevent white trolls from like impersonating a person of color and setting up a profile. And the other aspect that we sometimes get pushback on is, because there's a fee part of the equation, there's a question of people providing their credit card information, and again we're trying to balance like safety with sustainability, with privacy. So the credit card also is, if a troll has to provide their credit card information, they're less likely to join the site. And even if they did, it would be a way for us to track down the person if they're impersonating a person of color. So we had big discussions about this. How do we balance all these different kinds of needs of our community whilst trying to sustain the site?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to me because it's kind of like, I always find this funny because I'm like, white supremacists and trolls are so gung-ho on doing this, but they're cheap. So let's make sure that we put the $25 charge there and they won't pay for it, and providing personal information. So I think that, yeah, that was a really big security thing for us. And in terms of sustaining the product, as Valerie mentioned earlier on, we're not hoping for the BIPOC artists to sustain the product. That's why the fee is so low. That's why it's annual. It's only once a year. And we provide promo codes. We're doing lots of promotions. And at the end of the day, you can also ask for the fee to be waived. You just have to fill out this really simple form. I need a waive. We don't even really ask you to explain yourself. We'll just, if you are a BIPOC artist, you will get the waiver. So it's not, the funding sustainability is not coming from the artists. The funding sustainability is coming from the engagers. So we're really looking to organizations, arts organizations, advertising agencies, educational institutes, businesses who are looking to increase equity in their work, in arts sector and beyond, in advertisements, in commercials, in their writing, in their everyone that they hire,
in the
to really
social service agencies, like part of the vision of CultureBrew.Art was trying to disrupt or dismantle systemic racism, white supremacy, not only in the arts but across all sorts of Canadian civil society, because nobody works in isolation. Like part of colonialism and capitalism is trying to silo us into very small boxes. And so part of CultureBrew.Art is trying to find ways to subvert or tear down these silos or these walls. Yeah, so our marketing and then sustainability means we're not limited to, just getting theater A and dance company B and opera company C to subscribe to the site to find artists of color. We will be marketing to social service agencies who are looking for BIPOC artists to work with new immigrants or refugees or LGBTQ youth of color or other marginalized groups. And, the arts councils who say, oh, we couldn't find, enough artists of color for this jury, so there's only 1 out of 5, and that one person not only has to represent, the multiplicity of, if they're Asian like me, all the Asian cultures, but Indigenous and Black and Latinx and, Middle Eastern as well. Like, it's just ridiculous. So, media outlets are always looking for people to, speak as panelists on the radio or on television. So there's lots of ways for us to build representation and the voice for people of color through artists across all sectors.
And this is how we plan to sustain the product. We really see that writing grants forever is, and depending on grants to support this project is not going to be sustainable. There is a point when funders start to say, because the understanding, especially from arts, basically anyone who doesn't work in tech, any non-tech funders are going to go, but we already gave you money, so you're done building. There's not an understanding that you have to keep building and you have to keep investing in it. So we started to hear some feedback with funders saying, but we already invested in this, so why should we do it again? So just a heads up that depending on grants to carry this project over many years is not realistic. So we're really pushing, that's why we invested money in a communications firm, in a publicist, and we're really pushing to have this product be sustained through the Engager subscriptions. So that's a big piece of our funding sustainability. I want to move to development sustainability, which is related to funding. So development sustainability is a big concern of ours because development firm, like the ones that we've been working with, are very expensive. And actually, on the grand scheme of things, they're actually not that expensive. We're paying between $125 to $150 an hour for their work. And some development firms, like really, really high-end ones, you can look at $250 plus per hour. So, and the cheapest development firms I've seen are still like, $80, $90 an hour, but then the processes take a little bit longer because they're a little bit more affordable because they're a smaller shop. And what happens in development sustainability is that there's a couple of issues for us. One is the cost. So every time we need to make a change, the work that Valerie and I did yesterday in the hour she described, that would have probably cost us, honestly, about 10 hours of dev time, because by the time you report it to the firm and they send it to the project manager, then it goes to the developer, then they have all these internal processes that take a small thing and turn it into a very long stretch of work. So we really see it being a problem on a financial level to continue to depend entirely on a firm. And then secondly, there's another sustainability piece, which is our ability to be responsive. The way that you work with a developer, you give them feedback. And again, it takes them like 10 hours and it goes on their schedule. Last night, Valerie and I were able to be responsive right away because we had those skills. So we really see one important aspect of sustainability for a digital product is to build in-house capability, even if it is a shallow level of being able to do only some of the development, maybe the smaller items. We think in-house capacity for technical work, so budgeting it in to have somebody with development skills on your team. And then in our case, when we want to really give those opportunities to racialized and Indigenous folks, they've been at a disadvantage. We have to invest in training in these people as well. So we invest, if we want to work with developers that can be on our own team for the purpose of sustainability of development, We need to invest in people from our sector to build these skills, or people with interest in our sector. I actually am looking at applying for a professional development grant. And one thing that the funder said to me, it's an arts grant. He said, what's gonna tell us that you're not just going to take these skills and run away to the tech sector and make 3 times as much money? You know, it's a very valid fear. I really heard him. I was like, and honestly, I expected the question. And I was like, yeah, why should you invest in training me? And it's honestly because we have to. We have to invest in people in our sector to build these skills, to be able to support us. And there is a risk of them running away. Like, yeah, you could hire somebody who's a developer who says, I love the arts, I'm committed. You train them and they could run away to another sector. But I think that we at least need to try to build that capacity. The digital needs for the arts sector is not going away, and it's only going to increase. So for us, sustainability includes building that capacity in-house.
And I think that on top of just building on what you were saying, Anju, we're talking also about building sustainability within the sector, right? Yes. I mean, the idea, because artists are freelance for the most part, and if we provide opportunities for freelance artists, particularly BIPOC artists, particularly BIPOC women artists, to build technical skills that allow them to be paid, at a higher rate than they might normally, than they would be for waitressing or, temping, or all the other kinds of, or, being an usher at a theater, building tech gives artists the flexibility to take smaller jobs that they can do freelance in their time and work it with their other artistic projects. So I feel like, this is one way of building sustainability for artists to be able to support their artistic work.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm your case study there. So, Valerie and others have, but largely Valerie is deeply invested in me, and I am now supporting consulting on several digital arts projects that I think would be in a really precarious position if it wasn't for my experience and my ability to consult on those projects. Not to talk myself up here, but I think it really helped them to have me be accessible and to have my expertise there. And it's really about having someone who really is invested in this sector. And as a practicing artist, I'm a musician. I was working on this project build and I was on tour. I was touring and, checking my email and joining meetings from New Brunswick, that one meeting that didn't go so well because the internet was terrible. But, we could continue the project, and then being grounded in the arts while you're building for the arts was a really special perspective because I was talking to people every day. So that's the development sustainability piece. And this is something brand new for us. So we're really open to these conversations, and we're really looking for mentorship and support in how to build in-house capacity for technology building in arts organizations and the sector. So anyone who wants to continue that conversation, we're fully pursuing it right now. As I mentioned, I'm applying for a grant. Organizational capacity. This is a huge one. And we've touched on it a number of times, but really the sustainability, to me, this goes back right to the beginning. Should we build this product? So as you can tell, as we've gone through this journey, which I hope was at least showed you some of the pain points that we've had, but hopefully it wasn't as painful. We ended up, we started talking about, can you sustain this? And now we're at the end. You've launched the product. You're thinking about sustainability. So you've given up, so many projects, things put on hold. You weren't able to do the things you want to do. And now it's going to keep going. So do you have the organizational capacity to keep this going? All these things we talked about. I think that's a big piece. And Valerie, since you run a company, I would love for you to speak to this.
It's definitely a challenge. As I mentioned earlier, for the longest time, it was just me running this company. It's very small in scope. And it's only in the last year and a half, once, we started working on CultureBrew.Art and me realizing, oh shit, like this is a big thing that needs to be continuing on like forever. So how can we manage that with the the resources that we have? And so we started, excuse me, working towards getting operating grant support from the various arts councils. And so about a year and a half ago, we got our first operating grant from the city of Vancouver. Not huge, but always helpful. We had been in conversation with the BC Arts Council for about a year about, you know, becoming an operating client for them. And then the pandemic hit and they were not taking on any new operating clients. And so we have been, you know, constantly applying for other grants, you know, project grants, and which is again a huge stress on capacity, because all the time that you're working on writing grants is work that you're not actually using to actually do the work. So so these are big questions, and you know, and when we do have funding to hire more people, you know, it's also that process of hiring people that also takes time, like, you know, creating a post, writing a job description, getting it out there, interviewing people, onboarding people, training them, you know, getting them into the culture of how we work and stuff. All of that takes time and investment. And again, like eventually, you know, it will add to your capacity, but at this, you know, until that happens, there's sort of this dip in your capacity, because again, the time you're putting in that area of people is again taking away from actually doing the work. So it's a continuous kind of roller coaster of things feeling really good, and then recognizing that, oh, there's this area that there's no attention being paid to because we don't have the capacity, which adds to people's stress and anxiety, because everybody knows when work isn't being done, but everybody's working to the max already. And so, you know, you have to make some pretty hard choices of what you are able to do without burning people out.
Great. I feel like we just gave all of you a lot of information. Our intention was to really share with you our experiences specifically for the purposes of you avoiding some pitfalls. You may agree or disagree with what we had to say. I want to move into Q&A, but before that, I just want to acknowledge this was the funders that helped us with this project. And I think that you can see we tried to find a lot of funding. And our developer is Affinity Bridge, who's been helping us, and they've been fantastic with us in this new stage. And our hosting company, this is the Canadian hosting company that we use called CanTrust. They have the encryption at rest and all that other stuff. And their focus is on privacy and data security, especially in Canada.